Hello, this is a homily for the 18th Sunday of the year, and as you know, in ordinary time, we are being taught the basics of Catholicism. So what you have here today starts off with the very first word and the very first reading from Ecclesiastes, vanity. Vanity is somehow having an excessive pride in what I do, what is important to me. And this is the word on which all the other readings turn. The problem with vanity is that it sets us up as the standard of our life. And we're measuring ourselves according to our standard. And unfortunately, our standards quite often are learned from television, from particular TV shows, from the lifestyles of certain celebrities. Some people do learn from other sources, and so they learn, for example, from a great pianist, what a good skill is at music, what it looks like. Other people learn from scientists and so forth, and very often they can see a really great sense of music, sense of science, sense of sport, sense of adding something to the quality of the whole world around us. And in that sense, that is good. Or even that sense of adding something positive and valuable and rich to the culture still has to be measured against God. And what are God's standards? God always wishes us well. But you'll notice in the last line in the Gospel, these people have stored up treasure for themselves, but are not rich in what matters to God. So really and truly, the sense of value that we apply, whether I'm cleaning my teeth, or whether I'm driving my car, or whether I'm gathering my family around the dinner table, or taking my family on vacation, what kind of quality of work am I doing when I go to my business or my law court or my doctor's practice or whatever, my market garden. All these things really get measured up against what God has created us for. He is the only one who really understands what it means to be human. We have been drowned in philosophies that are agnostic, that are basically anti-human. And you can check very quickly, if you look at a political party, what kind of trail of death do they leave behind them as they go. And once you know the history, you can decide whether their philosophy is a good philosophy of life. So what we're being pushed to appreciate, and it's in the middle of summer when we should be relaxing and so forth, but we are still responsible for our immortal salvation. And consequently, it is really good now in this time when maybe we're under slightly less pressure. Maybe it's really good to take a look and say, okay, what are the standards that I use? And just as important, where am I learning them from? Am I trying to compete with this celebrity or with that person who's basically famous for being famous? Really and truly, where are the values coming from that I apply daily in my life? Where do I get the language that I speak? Where do I get the words that I use? There are certain words that I shouldn't use because speech is supposed to be helpful. And so we have kind of thrust into our faces today this question: Where do the values come from that we apply minute by minute in our lives? And so Jesus tells us we've got to be very much concerned with what matters to God, because anything else isn't as valuable, isn't as important. God created us. He showed us perfect humanity in Jesus Christ himself, and Vatican II emphasized that in their document on the church in the modern world. And so we know that Christ is the standard. We know that his teaching, what has come out of his mouth, literally is an expression of how he understands what's important. Where do values come from? For him, it's his Father. And so for us, it has to be values that are important to God. Just briefly then, comments on the readings. In Ecclesiastes, you have this vanity of vanities statement. Beautiful, classic statement, reappears thousands of times through the history of writing. And what you have here is someone pointing out to us, Kohelet, we're not sure exactly who he was, but pointing out to us that we have to appreciate that what we work for may not be the right thing to work for. Basically then, he's got a very negative sense of what life is all about, and to some sense I can agree with him. All his days are sorrow and grief. Even at night his mind is not at rest. This also is vanity, because what he's saying is, if we get really worried about certain things, are they really worth worrying about? Are there other things that we are neglecting? In the psalm, you have, if today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. Hardening of a heart being a metaphor, if you like, for another way of expressing vanity. Hardening our hearts means not being free, not letting ourselves be free enough to hear what God has to say to us, and closing ourselves in on ourselves. Oh no, I know where my values come from. I know enough about human life to be able to decide what is valuable and what is not. No, we are concupiscent beings, and humility forces us to recognize that, and consequently we forget very quickly, day after day after day, what is important, what is valuable, as it is understood by God. Fill us at daybreak with your kindness, that we may shout for joy and gladness all our days. As we're open to, because filling implies that something is being filled, as we are open to what God is pouring into our lives, we begin to see what has true value and what is simply something that can be discarded. In the letter to the Colossians, which means we're now reading the New Testament readings, you have Paul saying, if you were raised with Christ, seek what is above. Again, different words, same emphasis. Seek what is above, because from above, from God, from revelation, from Christ, from Scripture, from the tradition of the church, all those things are above us. They pour into our lives a proper standard of life. And not only a standard in the sense of being pernickety about things, but also realizing what is worth being joyful about, what is worth being really thankful for what has happened in our lives. In the gospel acclamation, blessed are the poor in spirit. The one who is poor in spirit is not flooded with their own ego. They're poor in spirit, recognize their poverty, like the tax collector who stands at the back of the synagogue and has his eyes down and says, Lord, I am a sinner, yet I come before you. Poor in spirit, and therefore God can fill us with his values, his joy, his peace. Lastly, in the gospel, we've mentioned this once before, you have Jesus giving this little parable about the rich man who basically has everything and is going to sit back and, to use again a quote that's been beaten to death over the millennia, rest, eat, drink, and be merry. And yet Jesus says, you fool, this night your life will be demanded of you. So basically, have you done anything with all your benefits? Have you used them for anything that has helped anyone else? So where do our standards come from? That's the question today. Have a good day.